The 1990s in Russia weren't just chaotic, they were formative. Power did not shift through elections or reform. It changed hands in smoky saunas, backroom deals, and car trunks stuffed with cash or corpses. I'm Elvira Bari, a writer born in the USSR. If you want to understand how Russia became the mafia state it is today, why loyalty matters more than law, and why democracy never stood a chance, you have to go back to where it all began. Back to the wild, broken decade that made Vladimir Putin inevitable. So let's rewind the tape and step into the crumbling Soviet shell that was Russia in the early 1990s. The Soviet Union looked mighty on the outside, but inside it was dirt poor. It couldn't provide even the basics: proper healthcare, decent food, or enough housing. The Soviet command economy was notoriously inefficient. On paper, everyone had a job. In reality, store shelves were empty, and production losses were massive. Whatever remained was funneled into the defense industry. Profit did not matter. There was no private property. Officials weren't rewarded for results, but for the glowing reports they sent to their superiors. And those superiors were also judged on how polished their reports looked to the next level up. It was fiction all the way to the top. This inefficiency was propped up by revenue from selling raw materials abroad. Despite all the Cold War rhetoric, the USSR had been trading with the West since the 1920s. The Soviet state needed foreign currency. Post-war Europe needed cheap fuel, timber, and metals. As long as oil prices stayed high, the illusion held. But when prices collapsed in the mid-1980s, the system cracked and a deep crisis hit. I remember this vividly. I was in high school then, and I watched it unfold in real time. Adults working in factories would come home and say they didn't have money for wages again. They paid us in product. That meant you might get a tractor tie instead of a paycheck, split between several workers. Do with it what you will. Once I was riding the train to Moscow when a group of women boarded with massive bags. They were selling crystal geese because their factory had paid them in geese. So they wandered from train car to train car, trying to sell them to passengers. No one knew what to do. Politicians on TV promised reform. They said all the right things, but the economy kept unraveling. First, stores ran out of goods. Then, when the government allowed prices to float freely, hyperinflation took over. Millions lost their jobs, especially in the military-industrial complex. And there were no new jobs waiting. So people did what they could. They went into trade. That's when the shuttle trade began. The government finally allowed citizens to travel abroad, and people saw an opportunity. They borrowed money from relatives and traveled to Poland, Turkey, or China, where they bought goods in bulk and hauled them back in giant checkered bags, an icon of the 1990s. Back home, everything was sold at the markets. If you needed pants, you didn't go to a store. There was nothing there. You went to an open-air market, picked through piles of clothing, and asked to try something on. There were no fitting rooms. The vendor would grab a worn blanket, stretch it between his hands, and say, "Go ahead, I've got you covered." And you'd stand on a piece of cardboard in your tights, hoping he wouldn't drop the blanket. Foreign goods were in huge demand. The ruble was collapsing, so people either bought tangible things or exchanged what little they had into dollars. At one point, Russia had more US cash in circulation than any country outside the US. Back then, having $300 or $400 tucked away made you feel rich. Most people lived paycheck to paycheck or hustled wherever they could. It was total instability. And that was terrifying for the average Soviet citizen who had been trained to rely on the state for everything. Suddenly, you had to make your own decisions, find your own income, handle your own survival. This collapse hit hardest for the most Soviet generation, those born in the 1950s and 60s. They'd never known pre-revolutionary Russia. They were raised completely inside the Soviet bubble. They did not travel. Few spoke foreign languages. Their only window into the outside world was Soviet TV. They were trained to follow orders. But now, the system had abandoned them, and they had no idea how to navigate the free market. No business skills, no safety net. It was a time of deep national stress. In another video, I tell the story of my father and how he tried to survive in the 1990s. It's a bittersweet story, and it explains a lot about what came next. Despite the chaos, the 1990s in Russia were a kind of gold rush, an era when massive fortunes seemed to appear out of thin air. Many Soviet-era factories were in crisis. Their clients had no money, which created a new class of middlemen who bartered across industries. For example, the railroad might need train parts, but only had freight services to offer. A middleman would find a candy factory needing transport to the Far East, then locate someone who wanted to buy candy and link everyone together for a hefty cut. That's exactly what the company I worked for in the late 1990s did. We didn't produce anything. Our boss just knew the right people. Privatization was also in full swing. Every citizen got a voucher to buy shares in former state-owned factories. But most people saw no value in them. These enterprises weren't paying dividends. Many were barely functioning. So people sold their vouchers for pennies, sometimes for a bottle of vodka. You could literally pull up to a factory gate with a truck full of booze and walk away with enough vouchers to claim ownership of the whole place. But to do that, you needed two things: a truck full of vodka and a plan for what to do with your new company. I once worked at a firm that did exactly that, buying up vouchers and acquiring entire enterprises. For example, you could take over a brick factory. Sounds impressive, right? Not really. The equipment was ancient. The staff didn't know what they were doing. And there was no sales department because under the Soviets, the state had always bought all the bricks. In short, the gold rush was only profitable for people who already had capital and knew how to build a business from scratch. Real estate became another gold mine. Before the 1990s, real estate agent wasn't a profession. But once people could privatize their apartments, they needed help navigating the process. A new industry sprang up. Some agents were honest. Many were predators. They preyed on people who were desperate, confused, or mentally unstable. A lot of people lost their homes during this period. The car trade exploded too. In the USSR, buying a car was nearly impossible. There were wait lists that lasted years. So when the borders opened, Russians began importing used cars. They bought old or damaged vehicles in Germany, Scandinavia, or Japan, and then hauled them home. Some were repaired, some were stripped for parts, some were sold as is. That's when foreign cars in a marquee started appearing on Russian streets. Owning one meant you'd made it, but it was risky. Buyers had no idea what they were getting, and sellers were often targeted by criminals. Carjacking was common. Highway ambushes, extortion, theft, even murder were part of the business. Then came pirated media. Western entertainment finally poured in. Under the Soviets, even finding an adventure novel was hard. But in the 1990s, newspaper kiosks near train stations sold stacks of books, mostly pirated. Publishers would translate foreign works without bothering with rights. I once spoke with Ray Bradbury, and he was stunned to learn that he was widely popular in Russia. He'd never sold the translation rights. Pirated movies were even more profitable. Someone would sneak a camcorder into a Western theater and record the film. Bad sound, bad angles, audience heads in the shot. In Russia, one of those famous nasal voiceover translators would dub it. distorting their voices to stay anonymous. These VHS tapes sold like crazy. The profit margins were huge, and many early entrepreneurs made a fortune. Same with software. In the 1990s, no one paid for computer programs. Piracy was the norm. Tourism also boomed. In the Soviet Union, foreign travel required a special passport, nearly impossible to get. But after the collapse, Russians flooded out into the world. Going abroad became a status symbol, showing off photos from Europe, tropical islands, or, if you were really lucky, America. Travel agencies popped up in every city to handle everything because few people spoke foreign languages and the internet didn't exist. Over time, the amateurs dropped out, real entrepreneurs built capital, contacts, and experience trading with the West. A tidal wave of imported goods hit Russian markets. Stores were full again, and when global demand for raw materials surged, driven by China's rapid growth, the Russian government suddenly had cash. It stabilized the economy, built a banking system, and even launched a stock market. Russians were quick to adopt the outer trappings of modern life and often improved on what they saw abroad. But this transformation did not create democracy or functioning institutions. Why not? Let's dig into that next. In the 1990s, success in Russian business did not depend on strategy or innovation. It depended on one thing: connections with gangsters, government officials, or ideally both. A thriving black market already existed in Soviet times. Running your own business could land you in prison, but the profits were high enough that many took the risk. Some smuggled goods across borders, others resold Western merchandise. Some made things and flipped them for cash. The only Russians with real business experience by the 1990s were those who had operated outside the law. And that takes a very specific mindset. Many had done time, some a lot of time, but they hit the ground running when the Soviet system collapsed. These were entrepreneurs who settled disputes not with lawyers, but with fists or firearms. If a rival gang tried to shake you down, you could not call the police. They weren't protecting citizens. They were busy protecting themselves or someone more powerful. The law, if you could call it that, was a mess. Most statutes were relics from the Soviet era. Courts didn't work properly. Rules contradicted each other, and enforcement was arbitrary at best. It felt like the Wild West on steroids. Power belonged to the most ruthless. If you weren't willing to get violent, you often ended up with nothing, or worse. This era gave birth to a now iconic figure, the New Russian. These were the men who got rich overnight in the post-Soviet gold rush. Middle-aged, slightly overweight with sudden indulgence, always frowning, always armored in visible wealth. They wore bright crimson jackets, sometimes embroidered with strange crests or monograms, thick gold chains, luxury watches, bulky early model mobile phones. And no New Russian would be caught dead driving a Lada. It had to be a Mercedes, BMW, or maybe a Volvo, if they were feeling modest. These were tough men with dark pasts. They held business meetings in saunas and prized one thing above all else: panty, the art of showing off. They followed the oldest social script in human history: display your spoils, throw fists, show off your mighty steed, now a German car, and of course parade a beautiful young woman on your arm, or two. Secretaries often doubled as mistresses. Some were hired from agencies, some were rented like the cars. Their performance was the point. In short, it was a deeply archaic yet instantly recognizable subculture, one that arises in every lawless frontier where state power has collapsed. A raw, primal code of dominance and display. And in the vacuum of the 1990s, it flourished. But these men soon faced a very serious problem. If the law doesn't protect your enemies, it doesn't protect you either. Not your money, not your children. So they made the only rational decision they could: get the money out, send the kids abroad, buy property in London, Cyprus, or Miami, stash the cash in Swiss banks. That became the post-Soviet elite's guiding principle for the next 30 years. Make your fortune in Russia, keep it in the West. The most profitable alliances of the era formed between three groups: savvy businessmen with cash and shady instincts, former Soviet officials with connections and the know-how to secure government backing, and criminals who could make offers no one dared to refuse and protect the whole operation from rivals. Out of that unholy alliance, a new regime was born: Putinism. The people who had built their wealth in the 1990s began moving into politics. It was a logical next step. Holding public office gave you two huge advantages. First, it gave you direct access to state property, which you could quietly siphon for personal gain. Second, it offered protection. If you had power, you had leverage. You could negotiate with both criminals and law enforcement from a position of strength. High-level government jobs didn't just offer wealth, they offered immunity. That's how a new ruling class emerged: a modern nobility. For example, it's unthinkable that the son of a top official would be drafted into the army. If a high-ranking bureaucrat runs over a pedestrian, the victim gets blamed, or their family does. After all, what they were doing walking where important people drive. But all of this depends on one thing: having a powerful patron. And your patron needs a patron, and so on, all the way to the top. Loyalty flows up, protection flows down. The system isn't built on merit, it's built on relationships. You are allowed to steal and exploit your office for profit, but only if you pledge total loyalty to your boss. Not to the country, not to the law, not to your consciousness. If you enter this system, you don't get to leave, unless it's out the window. Anyone who studied history will recognize the structure. It's feudalism, updated for modern times. The same structure that underpins organized crime and authoritarian regimes that behave like mafia states. At the top of Russia's power structure sit very specific kinds of people, with very specific values, morals, and pasts. Nearly all of them could be prosecuted for corruption, or worse. But no one cares, because their shady histories are exactly what makes them loyal. If the man at the top falls, the whole pyramid collapses. All deals, backroom protections, and silent loyalties lose their power, and no one knows what happens next. This has created a troubling reality. The Kremlin's decision-making is staggeringly poor. But that doesn't seem to bother anyone, because every crisis gets buried in money. Overestimated your military strength and invaded Ukraine? Oops. But don't worry. Just throw money at soldiers, propagandists, and widows. Problem solved. Lost your most profitable gas markets in Europe? Throw money at new buyers. Turned yourself into a global pariah? No problem. Offer cheap oil and invite a few allies to your May 9th Victory Day parade. Optics? Managed. But Russia's elite acts as if its resources are endless. They are not. The country lacks people, time, and resilience. The biggest crisis is demographic, a catastrophic drop in birth rates. There just aren't enough young men. You can defend your borders with drones, but you can't occupy foreign land without boots on the ground. And Russia is running out of boots. Still, the elite is betting they can wait it out. Putin believes commodity prices will rise again, just like they always have. He doesn't need to win elections. He just needs to last. He won't end the war voluntarily. Signing peace means admitting the truth. Billions spent, hundreds of thousands dead, and nothing gained. But as long as the war drags on, the illusion of progress survives. Unlike any mafia boss, Putin doesn't care what ordinary people think of him. He cares what his inner circle thinks. If they smell weakness, if they believe he's lost control, they'll remove him without hesitation. This is not a crowd known for empathy. In any country, the true elite are the ones who control three things: money, minds, and guns. To hold power, you need at least two. Control all three, and you are dangerously close to running a highly efficient religious cult. Lose all but one, and someone else will take your place. Control money and inspire collective action? You don't need repression. People follow willingly. That's how democracies work. Control minds and guns? You get totalitarianism. Think North Korea. Control money and guns, like in Russia or China? That's authoritarianism. Can that kind of elite reform itself? I doubt it. Elites by nature are the most conservative part of any society. They are on top and they like the view. That's why Imperial Russia's aristocracy ignored the sweeping social and economic changes of the late 19th century. They refused to adapt and lost everything. First money, then guns, and eventually their lives. The Soviet elite repeated the mistake. They were too comfortable to change. And once they lost control of minds and guns, the whole system collapsed. Putin's mafia state looks headed for the same fate. It can't win hearts and minds. Its imperial worldview, dividing the globe into spheres of influence, is obsolete. And it can't imagine anything new because a modern society would demand justice, real elections, and equality before the law. All things Putin's regime cannot survive. If the West wants peace with Russia, real lasting peace, then we have to start with something simple. Not sanctions, not summits, understanding. Because the modern Russian state wasn't built by strategy, it was built by survival. By men who lost everything in the 1990s, then build a new system designed never to feel powerless again. And if we don't understand the trauma that system came from, we'll keep being surprised by what it does next. That's why I started this channel, to explain not just the headlines, but the hidden logic behind them. So, if you found something useful here, I hope you'll subscribe, share, or leave a comment. It helps this work reach others. If you'd like to support my work more directly, you can click the join button, leave a super thanks, or buy me a coffee using the link in the description. And if you'd like to go deeper into the emotional and historical roots of modern Russia, take a look at my historical fiction series, Russian Treasures. The First Revolution, the exiles in Shanghai, Stalin's secret 1927 power grab, all told through personal stories rooted in real events. The links are in the description below. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning, and take good care.